across a range of domains, such as the reciting voice, the religious tradition question, and their personal commitment to that tradition, appears to be in tension with the multiple and drastic material transformations and transactions that sound reproduction actually involves. This poses the question of how this tension is addressed. How does it feature in use of sound reproduction? Now, interestingly, Mauritian Muslims engage in this practice of Naat, sidelining the material complexity of the medium when pinning their hopes for the seamless transmission of vocalization of the devotional discourse on sound reproduction technologies. Now, this raises the role of underlying assumptions about particular media here in a religious context, and of questions of how such media work and who controls its channels and what is being done and delivered by them. My Mauritian interlocutors stressed that to them sound reproductions technologies convey, if worked properly, a sense of witnessing a performance as if live and direct, one of the common quotes, which in turn enabled them to derive guidance from it. In the words of a teacher in his late 20s, it is like the experience of being there, to listen to Naat directly. It appears that such a notion of sound reproduction as a perfectly functioning, and therefore, to quote, to use Jonathan Stern's notion, vanishing medium, elides the multiple material transductions and its dependence on a large and multifaceted social and technological infrastructure. I mean, its material complexity of enormous extent literally disappears from awareness in the desire to find a technical solution for the problem of qualitative integrity of devotional recitation that plays such a great role in performances of commitment and continuity in this religious tradition. Now, the question of the materiality of language is thus closely linked to the question of the material transductions that enable the circulation of discourse. This also means that the circulation of discourse is a medial question, inseparably tied to the materiality of language that makes such circulation possible. We could then say that language is a medium of social cultural life and involves the work of transduction of one material modality to another. What is being made of these transductions? What's their significance? The answer depends in part on the relevance and deployment of semiotic ideologies. That's a concept that Greg Keane recently coined, such as in my example, above all, the logocentric notion that the voice is superior and more authentic means of transmitting devotional discourse than writing. Also, more specifically, media ideologies or politically and culturally charged notions of what certain media are and do appear to be of great relevance for understanding the work of transduction. Here, the sense that the complex material transactions and the vast infrastructure that sound reproduction technology involves become invisible in the search of a vanishing medium that erases its own traces is integral to the domestication of sound reproduction technologies into the religious practice of Mauritian Muslims. Now, how much time do we have? Actually, that's
about 5 to 10 more minutes.
Okay, 10 more minutes is fine. It's important to consider the various kinds of gaps that transduction and technological mediation have to bridge. Now, with mediation here, I mean objects or processes that link persons, concepts, or different social formations across qualitative, temporal, and spatial gaps. There's a gap here between things and state of affairs of persons or worlds of a different kind, or people or worlds that are somehow disjunct in temporal and spatial or both terms. Now, language as a form of embodied interaction is one of the foremost forms of social mediation in this general sense. However, the point is that its work of mediation also involves processes of material transaction that are often not treated as neutral, but rather as value-laden by social actors. In this context, it's worthwhile to examine more closely the nature of the gaps being bridged by language as a means of social mediation in material dimensions. Now, in my example of media-assisted circulation of devotional poetry among Mauritian Muslims, both live performative events as well as the listening to Naat recordings on audio CDs, which are also performance of their own kind, address the absence of the original text in its divinely inspired context of composition. As I've pointed out, both the didactic structure of the target text performed and its qualitative rendering through the performer's voice are regimented in such a way that they appear as an iconic replication of the divinely inspired context of the poetry's origin. So it's kind of that is a way of approaching across that gap. Now, this text of basically the text as a replica of this highly valued divine context works as a means to bridge the gap that opens up in the absence of the text of origin as divine essential characteristics of the gap. Now, poetry is most prestigious and authoritative. It can be traced back to revered saint scholars and saint poets who composed the text in moments of divine presence and inspiration. And the agentive capacities of the performance of the target text by the ordinary Muslims there today are of a very different kind. They lack the same privileged capabilities of interaction with the divine. Now, as I've indicated above or before, in the act of performance, they inhibit the participant roles of animators, who nevertheless also take personal responsibility for the poetic discourse, as it is often personally addressed to the prophet. And they also want to prophet, they also want to personally address him. And thus the effectiveness of the performance is an act of intercession with the divine, hinges on the merging of these participant roles. And the replication of the deictic structure of the text of origin and the qualitative integrity in its reanimation, the target text, they reorder the participant roles in such a way that they mitigate the stark differences of agentive capacity that constitute the gap to be overcome between the saint scholar, who has a direct connection to the divine, and the ordinary Persian Muslims. Now, in a somewhat less salient way, the gap also involves ontological differences between the performative context of origin and the target text. While the assumed composers of authoritative poetry, the poetry's reciters and present-day Mauritius are both human beings in this world. The former are scholar saints who are in a much closer relationship with the divine, and that's the conditional possibility for their composition of the most accomplished art. According to the Al-Sunnah tradition, its founder Ahmed Reza Khan Bareilly, who died in 1921, composed his most powerful art in moments when the prophet appeared before him, in a setting marked by and saturated by divine presence. Because according to that tradition, the prophet is actually not dead as an ordinary human being, but he continues to have a spiritual presence long after his death, in the presence of Nur light. It's the Nur Muhammadi, which is an old Sufi theme. It's in Urdu, in Persian, you call this doctrine Hazir or Nazir. That is, the prophet is present and observant, and can be summoned by praise poetry. You can make him appear in front of you, and that's, of course, a very powerful movement. And that is precisely what the more purist Sunnis reject. They say that this is all an innovation and superstition, and it's actually quite blasphemous. But these people actually are very committed to this tradition, and they believe that basically when the prophet appeared in front of the founder of this particular tradition, he composed the most powerful poetry, and that's their way. They have this desire to link up to this particular context. So basically, the textualization of art in the target context here helps to establish a link to a context of origin marked by the presence of the divine, which is also has a different ontological status. And then, since the time is, I think, running out, there's the third gap I want to talk about in greater detail is also this diasporic gap, which is very important in Mauritius, that separates Mauritians from sources of spiritual and religious authenticity elsewhere, here in India, or for other Muslims in the Middle East. But I will not say more about it. Now, returning to the circulation of art through sound reproduction technologies, Mauritian Muslims value sound recordings of the poetry mainly because of the model character of the vocalization of the devotional discourse that can listen to an audio CD. And so it's about safeguarding the qualitative integrity. And therefore, this media technology is also involved in bridging the various kinds of gaps between origin and target text as a perceived means of faithful transmission. That's really the role of these NART as they're circulated on audio media. Okay, but the same material qualities that make sound reproduction technology attractive to Mauritian Muslims, as it enables seemingly faithful reproduction of voice qualities, also make the technological mediation of NAT subject to uncertainties, as they facilitate the circulation of devotional discourse with its correct modes of vocalization across a broad range of contexts. They also open up the possibility of inappropriate recontextualizations. They may thus encourage the insertion of NAT into contexts that stand in a problematic relationship with the ideas of embodied piety that the proponents of NAT seek to achieve through its performance. And one example often mentioned by Mauritian Muslim interlocutors is the performance of Naat in Hindi films, such as the classic Mughal-e-Azam, which is a famous film from the 1960s, here, which Naat was actually recited. Here, the devotional poetry that often expresses feelings of longing and affection for the prophet is reinserted in plots which center on romantic love. And that's, of course, common in Sufi tradition. That has always been the case. There's a blurring between romantic love and love for God, and that it's ambiguous language and erotic language used all the time, but that's clearly seen as a problem here when it comes to the Hindi cinema, which is distinctly un-Islamic. And the perceived dangers of the Hindi cinema are not only present in the media-enabled traveling of the poetry in morally inappropriate contexts, also the musical styles and aesthetics of Hindi film entertainment can impact the way Naat is actually recited by Mauritians in the film Wudud. Now, the observation that some Mauritian Muslims are led to recite Naat to the melodies of and the performative styles of the film songs they frequently listen to is of great concern to established Naat Khan and others who've advocated the use of sound recordings of performances by accomplished Naat Khan as a means of guidance on these grounds. And basically, Mauritius is, of course, is an environment which is saturated by Bollywood entertainment. Right? That's clear. It's present everywhere. But nevertheless, others who think differently have no objections to reciting Naat, filmi style, or filmi taras is actually a technical term, and even advocate its accompaniment by musical instruments such as the daf, which drum that closely resembles the ravan, which is actually a no-go for most people who would advocate Naat, because Naat is not supposed to be music. It's a recitation of poetry. It's this shifting boundary between music and non-music here. And the latter, the ravan, actually plays an emblematic role in the Mauritian Sega music, whose performance is closely linked to Mauritian Creole identity of these Christians who are predominantly descendants of African and Malagasy slaves, which is kind of the national music in Mauritius, even though the Creoles are a minority. It's very much tied to the tourist industries or cigar troops perform in hotels and so on. That's basically not the context we want to be associated with. And now the use of sound reproduction technology in their everyday context are closely linked to musical and dance entertainment, which some regard as a danger, even though overall its beneficial uses in circulating and devotional poetry are not denied. I mean, this shows, for example, that in the case of Naat, the boundary between legitimate religion, right, the religious, and non-religion is actually not a matter of doctrine or pre-existing beliefs, but it's actually a matter of the aesthetics of performance, which actually basically determine what is the secular and what is the religious and the non-religious. And now these aesthetics of performance are inseparable from the materiality of the circulation of discourse. And the ambivalent attitudes to use of sound reproduction, the circulation of Naat, stem from the perceived danger that styles of performance influenced by Bollywood entertainment undermine the pious performance and its hopeful benefits, and ultimately point to the vicissitudes that the materiality of the circulation brings about, because it also makes it possible that the circulation gets out of control, out of the right hands. Now I'm moving towards the end of my talk, and finally, after having discussed the various gaps that the performance of Naat seeks to minimize, if not overcome, I would like to bring another understanding of transduction to bear on my analysis than the ones I've talked about so far. Now, according to Gilbert Simondon, the philosopher whose ideas are now increasingly understood to have been a pivotal inspiration for the thought of Gilles Deleuze, transduction is a productive process that not just brings separate realms into relation with each other, but that at the same time generates processes of what he called individuation, by which he actually meant the emergence of distinct entities of all kinds out of a pre-individual ontological whole. Now, it's a very philosophical approach to transduction. It's based on a monist, Spinozist kind of ontology where everything is one substance and it's constantly differentiating, and we have to account for how separation actually and differentiation actually unfolds. And this is actually very similar to Deleuze's notion of sheer multiplicity that divides continuously in a process of incessant differentiation, individuation, that Deleuze actually after Simondon called as term differentiation, and the English translation always writes differentiation with a C. Now this vitalist understanding of transduction that aims to capture how two or more different orders of reality enter in material interaction with each other through flows of signals, thereby generating new, often more complex entities, or what Eisenlohr called individuals, is remarkable insofar as it is highly abstract and extremely materialist at the same time. Examples, of course, could be given from biology, basically the genesis of an embryo or division of cells, where basically different entities come together, exchange signals, and something new is being produced in an incessant process of individuation and differentiation. Now, in an explorative manner here, very explorative manner, preliminary manner, I think it's very tempting to think sonic transduction through the lens of a very materialist and also vitalist ontology. No, which is actually quite different from the stance I've taken earlier in this talk, where it's all about social mediation. But I don't think these are very ultimately irreconcilable perspectives, even though they come from very different intellectual backgrounds. Now, for the purposes of my example of an art performance, the vocal dimensions of the performance that my performance described as so moving and crucial for its success can indeed be understood as materially bringing together not just the devotee listening attentively to the poetry, but also providing a connection between the compositional context of divine inspiration, I've described earlier in my talk, and the Muslims in their target performance at hand. Now, Simondon's notion of transduction, I think, is useful here, since the sonic transductions the performance enacts do not just involve multiple dimensions of transforming energy from one material state to another. For example, differences in air pressure being converted to analog electrical variations and back, both when they pass through bodies or machines of sound reproduction, but, and this is I think the key point, they also generate something new, such as a sense of being intimately connected among listeners, producing something like a religious community of some sort, and a sense of presence, of literally being in material touch with an otherwise imperceptible realm of the divine. Right? It's basically two realms who get together, who are being joined by sonic, basically by sonic signals, and by the process of transductions that occur when something new is being created. Now, transduction in this way provides us with a way to capture the ways in which the sonic religion operates in a manner going beyond its semiotic, otherwise meaningful dimensions, which are very important. I'm a trained linguistic anthropologist, but I'm saying that there's also something more to the sonic than that. And these dimensions I've earlier outlined in my earlier part of the talk. Now, sonic transduction thus produces particular effects in entities or individuals in Simondon's sense through enabling the sheer material articulation of separate realms of reality, such as the worlds of present-day Martian Muslims, and a sphere of the imperceptible and divine, producing a social aggregate one might call a religious community in the process. An Islamic community defines itself in terms of continuity of and attentive faithfulness to the tradition of the Prophet. To conclude, I think my time is up, right? And yeah. So, one more minute in my talk. So I aim to combine a semiotic analysis of religious performance with a perspective taking seriously the sonic and other mediatic transductions that the performance involves, at least try to do that, and at least in an explorative fashion, and that those point at ways of being connected and transcending the semiotic and meaningful. The focus here again was on transduction as a material and generative process, bringing separate realms into relation with each other in a very material way. Also, I sought to show that the materiality of language is also a medial question involving at least two different modalities. And on the one hand, we are confronted with the observation of media as they enable the social circulation of discourse, also work as machines of transduction, converting discursive tokens into a different material and semiotic modality. On the other hand, we are also confronted with a classical phenomenological account of media as being in the middle or in between something and its perceptible presence. This in turn raises the dialectics between mediation and immediacy, that is the oscillation of the medium between states of high perceptibility and its disappearance in states of expected and smooth functioning. I mean, basically, this is kind of a much more Hegelian and mediation focused problem of media technology. I mean, it's something that Walter and Grusin have called the alternation between mediation and immediacy. In my discussion of Martian Muslim that the materiality of discourse, as irreducible as it is nevertheless subject to very different states of awareness, and that they are the context where its presence is sidelined. This is especially the case in power-laden situations where access to and relationships with authority are at stake. The claim to be in possession of an unbroken link to a source of authority and power may go hand in hand with a relative denial of the complex material apparatus and infrastructure mediating the presence of such a desire for a source of authority. This encourages the impression that certain actors have now established a direct, unmediated connection to it, such a politics of immediation, as William Haller has called it, can operate in various fields, such as in the utopian promises of so-called e-governance, a big theme in India, for example, technically bypassing corrupt and inefficient layers of the bureaucracy, or in a visual culture of suffering with their political appeals, seemingly direct appeal to suffering through drastic images. Now, these contests can be brought into relation with the long-standing question of access to the divine, one of the central issues of what we might call the religious, where some actors claim moral superiority over others through fantasies that accompany the deployment of whatever counts as new media technology, which in the Reformation was print, now it is audiovisual, digital, whatnot, all sorts of audiovisual technologies, seeking a technical solution for the dilemmas and contradictions of that the interaction with the implicit and spiritual world is actually bringing about. Thanks.
Thank you very much for this very rich talk. I would like to invite questions or clarifications.
I should give the clarifications again.
Yes, please.
Thank you, Professor Eisenlohr. I was very interested, after reading your work, to hear the actual recording, which was full of reverb.
Yeah.
And so all of these questions about the sort of the grain of the voice and its performative textures, all of a sudden you get wrapped up in this reverb. Now, were they self-consciously cranking up the reverb here?
Yeah,
Because I think this would be another very interesting way to approach this idea of transduction. Because all of a sudden it's not only about kind of semiotic ideology, but the speaker, the loudspeaker, is itself cathecting up and energizing this timbre or texture of the voice in a very interesting way. So the first question was, are they self-consciously doing the reverb, which creates this kind of echo or warmth around the voice? Although I must say my ear is very unpiously trained in this genre. And if so, where does reverb fit into transduction? Or where does that fit into all of this and its relation to the voice?
Yeah, first of all, that's a very contested issue because many of these recordings have some sort of echoing or echo remastering of the voice involved. But there's always a debate about how much is too much, right? So that it becomes too obviously artificial, as they say, or too artifactual. And the Mauritian Naatkan say that the Pakistani Naatkan really overdo it, and that I've also listened to recordings, and there are hundreds of them on YouTube, right? Also audiovisual clips of Naat performances, and some of the most famous money-making Naat stars of Pakistan very heavily use the echo function, and that is something that Mauritian Naatkan find is not proper. It doesn't really. There's this kind of more Protestant idea of it has to be the true self that expresses itself. It has to be the true love of the devotee of the prophet, which finds itself in which is present in vocal expression, and therefore the technical artifice is there, but it should not be too obvious. Right? So it's definitely there. But again, the timbre of the voice is exactly these are the tonal qualities that are seen as an iconic sign of the divinely inspired context of composition and the awe and the joy and the being overpowered by emotion and but in the presence of the prophet conveyed. And that, again, it's subject to very different evaluations. Some people find that the extreme use of an echo effect is entirely appropriate and gives the right impression of Allah, and others will reject doing it to make money.
Further questions? Okay, I'm going to try. I've been familiarized with transduction only for about 2 months, so I'm not going to go to transduction. But when you showed us the text and worked with the contextualizing or decontextualizing and then recontextualizing and textualizing cluster of linguistic terms, maybe you could, first I'd like to know, or I mean, I've worked with these terms too, but as I listened to you, I thought, so why are we not just calling it citing? I mean, it's a citation practice, and many disciplines are familiar with it. So, what do we gain? I mean, what's the productive enlargement other than that you can use orality or other kinds of media with it? So that would be question 1. And question 2 is if the listeners are aware that this person is citing or contextualizing somebody else, they are realizing that he is not the authority. But I mean that it could. I mean you interpret it as that the person is moving himself closer or giving the audience a sense of getting in greater proximity to the divine. But couldn't you just argue the reverse, that the person has to rely on a string of contextualizations or allusions to somebody else, and thus making him, is it all men who prefer making?
Yeah, nowadays also there are medium that are held by women. There's a women performance of NAR, but it's the fact that women's voices in NAR has not been a controversial theme. You can find them on the radio. Many people say that it's not appropriate for men to listen to it, and so on. So but definitely there are usually medium which are separate from women or women perform women listen.
Anyhow, so what you get the gist of my 2 questions.
Yeah, first of all, I mean, we're not talking about different persons. It's clear that they're not a different person. I mean, it's, in Goffmanian terms, you're not talking about different persons, but participant roles. And the important point is that different persons can shift through different participant roles. That's actually what we're doing all day. Right? When I'm saying something and then I say, well, Jonathan Stern, according to Jonathan Stern, I'm shifting to the role of the animator, and then it's back again, me as the composer and originator of the discourse. It's something that we banally do, and it's very banal for us in everyday life. But of course, it's something that is important if it's regimented in structure. And I would say it's the performance works through that. That yes, Ahmad Reza Khan Bareli and the prophet before him and we are different people, but I can inhabit the participant role, but he also inhabits at least for the performance. So we are actually both in unison. We jointly address the prophet because I also take responsibility for the eye of the discourse, and that is actually done through the particles. And then the issue of semiosis, indexical. I mean, one important term that sounds very clunky, but I think is very important, is the indexical icon. I mean, we're getting to Persian semiotics. It may not be everybody's cup of tea, but I think it's I think it's a very useful comparative content. Basically, indexicality is about, simply speaking, relationships of co-occurrence between signs. I mean, like, for example, when I'm speaking English, I have a German accent, and that this kind of phonological variation is expected to co-occur with a German background. Right? So that's an index. Right? But the iconicity actually is the naturalizing effect behind it. It's the just so effect, and you find that in many rituals of the most different kind. That what are indexical relationships that could also be arranged otherwise are presented as an icon of something, as being qualitatively like. So that's the important thing. So that the dialectic relationships in the target text are arranged in such a way that they are just like, in a diagrammatic fashion, the origin texts. So that you have this idea that naturally the 2 texts belong together. There's a natural connection between them. And I think that's the power of semiotics. And semiotics can actually show that. How performance really changes social environments and drives social processes. And for this we need a toolkit that sounds very technical, but I think it's a very good technical term. Like the term, like participant ultimately something that is very difficult for me to ascertain, and there's no evidence for me. One important way of looking at the authorship of poem is the so-called the convention of the Takallus, which you find in Urdu poetry, just as in Persian poetry, in some Arabic poetry, that the penultimate verse has the pen name of the author in it. And then if you can, through the pen name, which is a fictive name, often a poetic name that is not related to the actual name of the author, but some of the bigger authorities have these pen names. But then again, who knows whether it is somebody else who used that pen name, right? But it's basically about process of authentication, because it's not quite clear what is the correct text. And because the genre is subject to attack, right? It's this for the Salafis, it's all shirk. It's basically a sin of idolatry, of elevating others next to God, and thereby watering down the unicity of God, which is, the worst thing, for them, the worst kind of thing you could do in Islamic tradition. And superstition and so on. It's illicit innovation, bid'ah is the technical term in Arabic. And therefore they are trying to defend that by saying, well, it's actually these people who composed it in the presence of the Prophet, and that they are do not just recite any sort of na'at. But yeah, it's just a matter of negotiation, what counts as authentic or not. It's very hard to pinpoint that. And some of them are just popular tradition, and with no more authors that like folk songs.
I have two questions.
Yeah.
One concerns your philosophical take on materiality, which kind of remained very vague to me throughout your talk. Is your understanding also a monistic one, that everything is material, or is there something immaterial? What is your take on that? And the other question?
Easy question.
That's an easy question.
Well, why don't you answer the easy question first?
Yeah, okay. No, but I think first, there are two very different, there's the monistic ontology, and then there's the question of mediation, where we're talking about dialectic relationships. And that's, from a philosophical point of view, they're just opposed, even hostile camps. And I think one can reconcile them by saying that there may be a gradient in social life, where you have basically circulating forms that are relatively autonomous from the given agency of people, and have acquired this process of individuation, and that there are others who are much more emergent from the context at hand. And they are not possible. I think ultimately, I don't think they are irreconcilable, and because one doesn't have to give up a monistic ontology while taking social mediation seriously, or large-scale circulating forms, like linguistic forms. We cannot just, they have a systemic aspect. We can't just do and undo at the moment. And it's very difficult to see exactly where they emerge from. But on the other hand, it's not something that is ultimately irreconcilable. And basically materiality, I think semiosis is material through and through. I wonder where the idea of meaning as something immaterial ever came from. It's Saussure who's responsible for that. It's the dualistic idea of signifier and signifier, so the material is simply the signifier, but the signified, the mental concept is something immaterial, and that's entirely, I think that's not it's outdated, it's not sophisticated enough as the semiotics anymore, and I think that if you see that semiotics always involves indexed and iconic relationships, that you have the materiality inbuilt in it.
But that's only if you've spent many years engaging in verse. And so I think there needs to be someone who can write, and this is the kind of game that everyone doing the semiotic ideology plays, is that they say, oh, the Saussurean model is, sort of outmoded and it's old. And they say, but Peirce has a great model, but, and then you go into your Peircean terms. But it would be wonderful if you or Professor Keane or someone could write me a beginner's guide to this, and then show in very sort of concrete, tangible ways.
Well, there's this book by Richard Parmentier, it's called, there's a chapter called Peirce Divested for Non-Initiates, which is kind of a very ironic way of putting it. Right? It was published in the 1980s. And of course, the larger, more simple idea of semiotic materiality also Syre, there's no circulation of signs of any sort without a signifier. A signifier always means it's a material medium of whatever kind, whether it's sonic, air-based, or whether writing or whatever. So that is that's certainly there, but with materiality, I also want to point at it's a larger umbrella term where semiosis presupposes materiality, but materiality is not exhausted by semiosis. And that's why I think the whole notion of transduction, of signals from different spheres interacting with each other, energy being introduced into different spheres. You can basically conceive it in semiotic terms. You can basically say that, well, I mean, there be variations of air pressure, and they're being transduced into analogous electrical variations in either voltage or current. Right? And then, of course, you have an indexical relationship there, because the relationship of co-occurrence and causality, and you even have an iconic relationship, because the word also